What happens when one of music's most genuine voices sits down for what should be a simple morning interview, only to be ambushed by a host with an agenda? In just 44 seconds, George Stephanopoulos would go from seasoned anchor to national embarrassment, all because he couldn't handle the authenticity of his guest. This is the story of how Teddy Swims got kicked off Good Morning America and how the internet decided who the real villain was. The studio lights were bright that morning as Teddy Swims walked onto the Good Morning America set. He was there to promote his latest album, talk about his tour, and share his journey from viral covers to sold-out arenas. The audience was excited. Teddy had become the people's artist, someone who felt real in an industry that often felt manufactured. He wore his usual casual style, tattoos visible, big smile on his face, ready to connect with viewers the way he always did. George Stephanopoulos sat across from him, notes in hand, with Robin Roberts and Michael Strahan flanking the anchor desk. The segment started normally enough. "Teddy Swims, welcome to Good Morning America," George said with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thanks for having me, man. Excited to be here," Teddy responded, his Georgia warmth filling the room immediately. "So, let's talk about your rise," George began, leaning back in his chair. "You started doing covers on the internet, YouTube, right? Singing other people's songs in your car, in your bedroom. Tell us, when did you decide to actually become a real artist?" The question landed like a slap. Robin's eyes widened slightly. Michael shifted in his seat. Teddy's smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered. "Well, George, I've always been a real artist," Teddy said calmly. "Those covers were me sharing my love for music with people. Each one was a piece of my heart. Just because I was singing songs that already existed doesn't mean I wasn't being authentic." George waved his hand dismissively. Sure, but you understand what I mean. Covers are, well, they're training wheels. Anyone can sing someone else's song. Creating your own work, that's when you become legitimate." Robin jumped in quickly, trying to redirect. "Teddy, your original music has really connected with people. The vulnerability in your lyrics is beautiful." "Thank you, Robin. That means a lot," Teddy said, grateful for the lifeline. "I write from personal experience. Every song is a real moment from my life." But George wasn't done. He shuffled his notes and looked up with what could only be described as a smirk. "Let's address the elephant in the room, though. Your appearance. The tattoos, the casual look, the whole, vibe you've got going on. Do you ever worry that you're limiting your audience? That mainstream America might not take you seriously?" The studio went quiet. A producer in the background could be heard whispering urgently into their headset. Michael Strahan's jaw clenched visibly. Teddy took a breath, his eyes hardening just slightly. "George, with all due respect, this is who I am. I'm not trying to be anyone else. The tattoos tell my story. Every single one means something to me. And the people who listen to my music, they appreciate that I'm genuine. I'm not putting on a costume or playing a character." But in the entertainment industry, George pressed on, his voice taking on a condescending edge, image is everything. Look at the great artists. They understood presentation. They knew how to look the part. Don't you think you'd be more successful if you, cleaned up a bit? Robin interjected again, her voice firm. "George, I think what makes Teddy special is exactly his authenticity." "I'm just asking the questions our viewers are thinking," George said defensively, holding up his hands. "Are they, though?" Michael finally spoke up, his tone pointed. "Because, from what I've seen, people love Teddy exactly as he is." George ignored his co-hosts and continued his interrogation. "Let's talk about your background. You worked regular jobs before music took off, correct? Fast food, retail, that sort of thing?" "I did," Teddy confirmed, unsure where this was going. "I'm proud of that. I worked hard to support myself while pursuing my dream." "Right. So you come from, let's say, a more humble background," George said, his tone dripping with implication. "Do you ever feel out of place now? Rubbing shoulders with established artists, people who went to prestigious music schools, who grew up in the industry? Does the imposter syndrome ever kick in?" Teddy's face shifted. The southern kindness that usually radiated from him was being replaced by something sharper. "I've never felt like an imposter, George. My path was different, sure, but it was real. I earned every single thing I have through hard work and dedication. I didn't need connections or a fancy school to teach me how to feel music." "Defensive," George noted with a little laugh, looking at the camera. Touched a nerve there. You're being disrespectful, Teddy said flatly. The studio audience murmured in agreement. George leaned forward, his voice taking on a more aggressive tone. Disrespectful? I'm conducting an interview. If you can't handle tough questions, maybe you're not ready for this level of exposure. Tough questions? Teddy repeated, his voice rising slightly. You've done nothing but insult me since I sat down. You've questioned my legitimacy as an artist, criticized my appearance, and now you're trying to make me feel inferior because of where I come from. That's not journalism, George. That's just being a bully with a fancy desk. The audience erupted in applause. Robin was nodding. Michael had a slight smile on his face. George's expression darkened. I think we need to remember who's the guest here and who's the host, George said coldly. I've been in this business for decades. I've interviewed presidents, world leaders, the most important people on the planet. You're here because we're giving you a platform. And there it is, Teddy said, sitting back in his chair. That's what this is really about. You think you're better than me. You think because you've been on television forever, that gives you the right to look down on people. But let me tell you something, George. Those covers you dismissed, those connected with millions of people, those regular jobs you tried to make me feel bad about, they kept me grounded and taught me more about real life than you've probably experienced in your bubble. George's face flushed red. How dare you? Do you know who you're talking to? I'm talking to someone who forgot what it means to be humble, Teddy responded, his voice steady but powerful. You sit up there in your designer suit, looking down at everyone, thinking you're untouchable, but you're not. You're just a guy with a microphone who's gotten too comfortable being mean. Robin tried to step in. Let's all take a breath and… No, Robin. George cut her off, his eyes locked on Teddy. This person comes onto our show, our prestigious show, and has the audacity to lecture me about humility? Someone who got famous singing karaoke on the internet thinks he can tell me how to conduct an interview? Karaoke, Teddy repeated slowly, and something in his demeanor shifted completely. You know what, George? I came here with nothing but respect. I was excited to be on this show. I grew up watching Good Morning America. But you've made it crystal clear that unless you fit into your narrow little box of what acceptable looks like, you don't deserve respect. Michael Strahan spoke up, his voice supportive. Teddy, for what it's worth, a lot of us here appreciate your talent and your message. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate that, Teddy said, acknowledging him before turning back to George. But your boy here has other plans. My boy? George sputtered. The disrespect is unbelievable. You want to talk about disrespect? Teddy was standing now, his microphone still clipped on. You invited me here under the pretense of a promotional interview. Instead, you've spent the entire time trying to tear me down. And for what? Because I don't look like what you think a star should look like? Because I didn't come from money or connections? Because I represent something real that makes you uncomfortable? The cameras were still rolling. The producers were in full panic mode backstage, unsure whether to cut away or lean into the drama. This was live television gold, even if it was a nightmare for the network. George stood as well, his voice sharp and angry. You're done here. This interview is over. I agree. It is over, Teddy shot back. Because I'm not going to sit here and let you treat me like I'm beneath you. Security, George called out, actually calling for security. The audience gasped. Robin stood up quickly. George, come on, that's not necessary. He's being hostile, George insisted, pointing at Teddy. He's defending himself, Michael countered, also standing. Against your attacks. Attacks? George's voice went up an octave. I asked legitimate questions. You asked insulting questions designed to make him look small? Robin said firmly, her professional composure cracking to show genuine frustration. We all heard it, George. The whole country heard it. Teddy started to remove his microphone. I'll see myself out. Don't need security to escort a guy who you clearly think isn't good enough to be here anyway. That's right. Leave, George said bitterly. Run back to your little internet fans who don't know the difference between real talent and viral moments. Teddy stopped. He turned back slowly. You know what the saddest part of all this is, George? You used to be someone I looked up to. I watched you interview people with intelligence and grace. But somewhere along the way, you forgot that the people you interview are human beings with feelings and dignity. You became the kind of person who uses their power to make others feel small. And that's not strength. That's weakness. The silence in the studio was deafening. Robin had tears in her eyes. Michael was shaking his head. The audience was completely still, hanging on every word. George's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For once in his career, the polished newsman had no response. "I hope you find your way back to who you used to be," Teddy said quietly, the anger draining from his voice, replaced by something like pity. "Because this version of you, it's not someone to be proud of." With that, Teddy walked off the set. The cameras followed him as he made his way through the studio, past crew members who patted him on the back, past audience members who gave him supportive nods. He didn't storm off. He didn't slam anything or make a scene. He simply walked away with his head held high, his dignity intact. Back at the anchor desk, chaos reigned. George was arguing with producers through his earpiece. Robin was visibly upset, whispering urgently to Michael. The show cut to an unscheduled commercial break 3 minutes earlier than planned. When they returned from break, George was composed again, his professional mask back in place. But there was something different in his eyes. Robin took the lead. "We're going to take a different direction this morning," she said smoothly. "And we want to thank Teddy Swims for stopping by." "Indeed," George added stiffly, and it was clear someone had talked to him during the break. "We wish him well with his tour, but the damage was done." In those few minutes of live television, something had shifted. A talented artist had been disrespected, had stood up for himself, and had been punished for it. And America had watched the whole thing unfold. The remaining segments of the show felt hollow. George's interviews with the other guests were noticeably more careful, almost timid. Robin and Michael exchanged looks throughout the broadcast that spoke volumes. The energy in the studio never recovered. What had started as a routine morning show interview had become something else entirely. It became a moment that crystallized something many people had been feeling: the disconnect between traditional media gatekeepers and the new generation of artists who built their careers outside the system. The way success is defined by some as only legitimate if it follows a certain path, looks a certain way, comes from certain circumstances. Teddy Swims had walked onto that set as a guest promoting his music. He left as something more, a symbol of authenticity in an industry that often rewards the opposite. Someone who refused to be diminished, even when facing down a powerful figure on live national television. And George Stephanopoulos, the seasoned journalist, the man who had interviewed countless important figures, had revealed something about himself that morning. That despite all his experience, all his accomplishments, he still viewed the world through a lens of elitism and judgment. That his position of power had perhaps made him forget the basic principle of treating people with respect, regardless of their background or how they looked or what path they took to success. The contrast couldn't have been starker. On one side, a tattooed singer from Georgia who worked regular jobs and built his career one YouTube video at a time, who spoke from the heart and refused to pretend to be something he wasn't. On the other, a network news anchor in an expensive suit, wielding his platform like a weapon, unable to see value in anyone who didn't fit his predetermined notion of worthiness. The studio audience that morning saw it. The crew members who worked behind the scenes saw it. Robin Roberts and Michael Strahan saw it. And most importantly, millions of viewers watching at home saw it. They saw who conducted themselves with grace under pressure and who revealed their true colors when challenged. As Teddy pushed through the studio doors and stepped out into the New York morning, he took a deep breath. The city noise washed over him, a stark contrast to the artificial quiet of the television studio. He pulled out his phone and saw it was already blowing up with messages of support. People who had been watching live, people in the industry, fellow artists and fans, all of them saying the same thing. "You handled that perfectly. You stood your ground. You didn't let him break you." Inside the studio, George sat at the anchor desk during another commercial break, staring at his notes. Robin approached him carefully. "That got out of hand," she said softly. "He was disrespectful," George muttered, not looking up. "George," Robin said, her voice gentle but firm, "you went after him from the first question. We all heard it. He was defending himself." "I was doing my job," George insisted. But there was less conviction in his voice now. "Your job is to interview people, not tear them down," Michael added, joining the conversation. "That guy came here excited to share his music, and you treated him like he didn't belong here." George finally looked up at his co-hosts. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe, or regret. But it passed quickly, replaced by defensiveness. "You're both overreacting." This will blow over by tomorrow. But Robin and Michael exchanged a look that said they knew better. This wouldn't blow over. This was the kind of moment that defined careers, that revealed character, that people would remember. The show continued for its remaining hour, but everyone knew the only thing anyone would be talking about was those explosive minutes with Teddy Swims. Every subsequent segment felt like filler, like everyone was just going through the motions until they could leave the studio and process what had happened. In the control room, producers were already dealing with the fallout. Phone lines were lighting up, social media was exploding, the clip was being shared across every platform, and the sentiment was overwhelmingly clear. Teddy Swims had won the court of public opinion before he'd even left the building. What George had intended as an interview where he could flex his authority and maybe get some viral moments had backfired spectacularly. Instead of looking like a tough journalist asking hard questions, he looked like an out-of-touch elitist picking on someone for not fitting his mold. Instead of Teddy looking defensive or unprepared, he looked principled and strong. The dynamic that had played out on that stage was bigger than just two people having a disagreement. It represented a larger cultural conversation about who gets to decide what success looks like, about whether the old gatekeepers still hold power or if the democratization of media through the internet has fundamentally shifted things, about authenticity versus polish, about substance versus style, about earning respect versus demanding it because of your position. Teddy had represented one side of that conversation without even trying. He was simply being himself, responding honestly to attacks on his character and his legitimacy. He hadn't gone on the show looking for a fight. He'd gone to talk about his music, his journey, his gratitude for his fans. But when pushed, when disrespected, when told implicitly and explicitly that he wasn't good enough, he'd push back. Not with aggression, but with truth. George had represented the other side, perhaps without fully realizing it. The establishment, the old guard. The belief that there's a right way and a wrong way to do things, and that those who don't follow the prescribed path are somehow less than. That authenticity is fine, but only if it's packaged in a way that's acceptable to traditional sensibilities. That tattoos and casual clothes and working-class backgrounds are things to overcome or hide, not celebrate. And in that clash, live on national television, with millions watching, one approach had resonated with people and one had alienated them. The verdict wasn't close. It was overwhelming. Teddy had stood for something real. George had stood for something that felt increasingly outdated and disconnected. As the show finally wrapped and the crew began breaking down the set, there was an unusual heaviness in the air. People spoke in hushed tones. Some avoided George altogether. Others gave him looks that ranged from disappointment to barely concealed frustration. This wasn't just another day at the office. This was a moment that would be replayed, analyzed, and remembered. George gathered his notes and left the studio without his usual rounds of goodbyes and small talk. Robin and Michael did a brief huddle with producers, their faces serious, clearly, discussing how to handle the inevitable questions that would come. Outside the ABC studios, Teddy stood on the sidewalk, his team gathering around him. His manager looked concerned. "That was intense. Are you okay?" Teddy nodded, and despite everything, he smiled. Not a smug smile or a bitter one, but a genuine smile. "Yeah, I'm good. I couldn't let him talk to me like that. I couldn't sit there and pretend it was okay." "You handled it perfectly," his publicist said, checking her phone, which hadn't stopped buzzing. "The response is incredible. Everyone's on your side." "I wasn't trying to win anything," Teddy said quietly. "I just wanted respect. Basic human respect." And that, ultimately, was what the whole confrontation had been about. Not publicity or viral moments or career strategy. Just one person asking to be treated with dignity and another person revealing that they viewed some people as more deserving of dignity than others, based on superficial judgments. The morning sun was getting higher in the sky. New York City moved around them with its usual frenetic energy, unaware and uncaring about the drama that had just unfolded in the television studio. But online, across the country, the conversation was just beginning. Clips were being shared, think pieces were being written, debates were happening in comment sections and around office coffee machines. Good Morning America had given the people a moment they wouldn't forget, just not the kind the producers had planned for. It had given them a clear example of what happens when authenticity meets elitism. When new media collides with old media, when someone refuses to be made small. Teddy Swims had walked into that studio as a successful artist. He walked out as something more, A voice for everyone who'd ever been made to feel like they weren't good enough. For everyone told they didn't look right, or come from the right place, or take the right path. For everyone who'd been dismissed by people in positions of power who confused their authority with superiority. And George Stephanopoulos had started that morning as a respected newsman. He'd ended it as an example of everything people were tired of in media and in celebrity culture. The condescension, the judgment, the inability to see value in people who exist outside narrow definitions of acceptability. Neither man had intended for any of this to happen. But in 44 seconds of heated exchange, in those moments when civility broke down and true feelings emerged, they'd both revealed exactly who they were, and America had been watching.